Hello, everybody. I am Dr. Sharon Grossman. I'm a psychologist, coach, and speaker. And today I'm going to talk to you about 5 ways in which you can reprogram your mind. You may be somebody who really struggles with anxiety. And anxiety usually takes the form of what if thinking, where we say, well, this is going well, but what if I lose this thing? Or what if this happens? And what if something bad is gonna replace it, or something horrific, waiting for that other shoe to drop, essentially. All of these what if scenarios really creates anxiety within us. And it really robs us of the pleasure in the moment. And so we're going to talk about ways that you can shift some of your thinking so that you can enjoy the moment better and you can really be more present. So the first thing I would suggest to you is journaling, there's different ways to journal. So let's be really specific about this. One way to journal that could be really helpful is jotting down exactly what happened. So you write down the scenario, and then you go back and you want to identify any sort of words that can really highlight any sort of negative thinking pattern, or what we call a thinking trap, right? So thinking traps include things like black and white thinking. That's when we think about things in very extreme ways. It's either always or never. So those are the kinds of words that you want to be looking for. If you see the word should, that means that you are putting a lot of pressure on yourself, and maybe you're feeling guilty about something. So again, these words connect to feelings that we later have. And if we change the thought, we can change the feeling. So you want to scour through your writing. You want to identify any words that signify that there's a thinking trap. And then you can do a couple of different things with that. You can, first of all, identify what the thinking trap is. So that's really important. And then you can take it a step further. You can ask yourself, when in my life have I had a similar way of thinking about things? And then you can say, well, when I was 15, this thing happened to me and blah, blah, blah. So you start to make connections between the way that you're thinking about the scenario right now and how you used to think about it in other past examples. And the more and more you do this, the more you'll be able to start making those connections in the moment when you need them, up here. So rather than having to go back and write them all down, it is something that you can say, oh, I'm doing that black and white thinking thing again. Okay, so that's going to be really helpful with practice. The other thing that you can do, so that this is the second way that you can really reprogram your mind, is think about how to reframe. So when you say something a certain way, it might not be very helpful, or it might not even be accurate. How can you say it differently so that it is more helpful and more accurate? So thinking about how to reframe. And one of the things that helps us reframe is to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes, somebody who we respect, somebody who's maybe more optimistic or more realistic or more just kind, perhaps, because sometimes we're just so hard on ourselves. So what would somebody who really cares about you, knowing the situation that you're in, what would they say about you or about the situation? How would they, quote unquote, reframe it? And that's going to help you to think about it in a new way. The third way that you can really reprogram your mind is looking for evidence. So you've jotted down everything that's happened. And again, journaling is really effective, because one thing that I've always told my clients is when we don't write things down, we have a tendency to ruminate. Now, how many people here actually can relate to that, where your mind just keeps going back and forth over the same things over and over and over again? This is the kind of thing that gets in the way of us being able to fall asleep at night, because we're just thinking about our day or worrying about what's coming tomorrow. So writing things down helps us to really download everything from our mind. So now that we've written it all down, what we can do is ask ourselves, where is the evidence that what I just wrote down or what I was just thinking about is true? And so you say, well, this happened and that happened and this person looked at me in this way and then they said this thing. So you write it all down. It's kind of like your evidence for why this might be true. But just to be fair, you want to also look at the other side of the equation, which is what evidence goes against this interpretation or this belief. And say, well, you know, lots of people have looks on their faces and it might not mean this, it might mean something else. Or it might be that, well, this thing happened to me, but it's happened to lots of people. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's this thing wrong with me. So you start to look at what other meanings there could be, or, hey, you know, my sister maybe said something that made me feel upset, but maybe that's something she says to everybody and it's not really about me. Or maybe there's lots of other examples of how she's been super kind and loving. And so I'm not going to take this out of context. I got to think about it in the greater context of things. And that helps me to reframe it. So that is a third way. So we've talked about thinking traps and looking for patterns. We talked about reframing. And now we've talked about looking for evidence for and against. So now that brings us to the fourth way that you can reprogram your mind, and that is through gratitude journaling. We are so easily able to identify everything that is wrong, right? Our brain is kind of like a magnet to negativity. And so it takes an extra effort on our part to be able to find the things that are going well, which we so often just take for granted. So gratitude journaling is about sitting down and really thinking, like, what do I have to be grateful for? And they can be really small little details, like that the sun was shining, or that somebody smiled at me. Or it could even be a big thing, like, hey, you know what? I just got a raise, or somebody acknowledged my efforts. Okay. So that the more you do that, so this is not a one-time thing. None of these are. It's about, when we talk about reprogramming, we know that it takes about 30 days to establish a habit. So you got to be consistent over time. So do your gratitude journaling every single day, and maybe it only takes you a minute to do it or 2 minutes to do it. It's going to be a well worth effort when you've invested that time. And so the last way in which you can really reprogram your mind is by practicing a mantra. A mantra is basically a positive affirmation. It is something that you want to believe that maybe you don't quite yet believe. And so oftentimes what I've seen very commonly is that people believe that they're just not good enough. And as a result of that belief, they believe that what they're doing is not good enough. Right? So our production is a result of our personal value. So you can kind of rewind the tape and say, well, if that's what I believe about myself, how can I flip that around? And so the opposite would be that I am enough. And if I am enough, then what I do potentially could be good enough. And then I can feel good about myself rather than constantly be pushing myself to the nth degree. And so I would say that mantra many times a day, as much as I can remember to, and often you want to set some sort of a reminder, because that habit isn't yet established, to remind you to continually say it and say it and say it until you start to believe it. And that's what reprogramming the brain is all about. It's just a matter of repetition, consistency over time. So to recap, 5 ways to reprogram your mind include identifying those thinking traps, obviously through journaling first, and identifying those patterns in which we think so that we can stop using those, increasing mindfulness around that. It's about reframing things. So we might have a go-to assumption, a way of thinking about things, and we want to reframe our go-tos. We want to think about things in a new way because it's going to help us feel better. We want to look for evidence. Maybe rather than just assuming that if we think something, then it's true, we want to actually look for evidence that it is true. We want to look for the good things in life. So practicing some gratitude journaling is going to be helpful to really bring to light all the things that are going well. It helps to really counterbalance anything that might not be going well. Helps us again with our mood. And lastly, we want to practice our mantras because it's going to help us to overcome any sort of negative beliefs that we hold that then get in the way of how we feel and what we do, and can just really change your life. So hope this was helpful, and I look forward to seeing you at the next session. Take care.